Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Path 11 podcast today. As you know, the story of Mike and I is a healer meets a videographer. My guests today kind of have the same story, but it's a healer meets a physician. I'd like to welcome on the show today Dr. David Steinhorn and Jana Din, and they are also going to be presenters of the Afterlife Awareness Conference, and that is being held June 25th through the 27th, and they'll talk a little bit about what they're going to be presenting there at the conference. If you'd like to purchase tickets, we're actually doing it virtually, and Path 11 Productions is going to be hosting that conference, and you can purchase your tickets at afterlifeconference.com. I already had the chance to actually sit in on one of their presentations with the Afterlife Symposium, and it was absolutely amazing. So I'm very excited to talk to you both today. So if you guys can imagine, shamanism meets Western medicine. That's what this duo is all about, and it's just phenomenal. For the past 8 years, the both of them have been providing Western medicine and shamanic healing support in the clinical setting of hospitals, hospices, and other medical facilities nationwide. Dr. David Steinhorn is nationally known, a specialist in pediatric critical care, palliative care, and hospice medicine. And Jana Din is a former child psychology teacher, shamanic healing practitioner, and co-founder and director of the Tao Center for Healing. So their unique collaboration began in 2013, and they are providing shamanic healing support to patients and their families. And we're going to hear a lot more about how shamanism and Western medicine has combined. And I know that you guys focus a lot on children as well, the care of children. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Okay, so who would like to start? Who would like to maybe tell the story a little bit about how the two of your paths crossed?
Well, I'll let David start.
I'm going to start by saying I think that most of the people listening are familiar with Western medicine, since it is the default medical system in North America, Europe, and many of the so-called developed countries in the world. And yet, even as the default medical system, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily the be-all and end-all of healthcare. And recognizing back in the 1980s, in the early part of my academic medical career, that we were missing important parts of how we care for patients, and often creating more suffering and burden in our attempts to save patients in the intensive care unit setting. It set me on a professional quest to find other colleagues who were able to provide the sort of healing and support that was necessary to broaden and deepen the care that I could provide to patients. And so I think we should fast forward to 2013 and my relocating to UC Davis in Sacramento, California, when my wife was recruited to head the Department of Pediatrics at UC Davis. And that allowed me to continue my own personal work and study in shamanism, and then to bring the sort of shamanic approach to healing into my Western medical practice in the academic medical center. And that really leads us, I think, to turn this over to Jana and to have her talk a little bit about what shamanism is, because I think from the Western medical allopathic perspective, shamanism sounds like a bunch of voodoo and woo-woo, and I'd like Jana to talk a little bit about how this fits in with the Western system.
So shamanism really has been around in all cultures around the world for thousands of years, according to archaeological evidence. And so really it is addressing the healing needs of the mind, body, spirit, and soul. Because if you look at Western medicine, it's really addressing the body, the mind, the emotions, but who addresses the spirit and the soul? And so shamanic healers do. And essentially the word shaman is a Siberian term, and it really means a healer who works on a spiritual level. And typically a shaman uses some kind of percussive sound. So it could be their voice, it could be an instrument. In my case, it's a drum, to create, really, if you want to think about it, the mother's heartbeat, which is very soothing and calming even for newborns to listen to. And so it's that very rhythmic drum beat in my case, or it could be toning using a gong, a whistle, just any kind of rattle, for example, that essentially allows the practitioner to get into a different state of consciousness. And during that time, the healer can access information and healing on behalf of the patient, client, and the community. And so in doing this work with David, that's how we combined and collaborated.
Wonderful. And how exactly did you guys find each other? Like, I know that David was interested in this. Did he come to you for a session, or did you know his wife, or how did you actually enter into his practice?
Well, I'll let David actually answer that.
Okay.
I think that most healers recognize the fact that they are not only doing work on behalf of their clients and patients, but also doing their own healing work, and that just as the mystical saying, one hand washes the other, has come down to us through the ages. I think that I know that my realization for the last, probably almost 50 years now, since my early 20s, I've been doing my own life journey and healing work, and I've attempted to build that into my medical practice, originally through study of cosmologies and other sorts of approaches to mystery schools. But then as I evolved and it became very clear that Western medicine didn't have all the answers, that bioethics and philosophy didn't have all of the answers, and that we needed to look more towards more ethereal or mystical approaches to human suffering and healing, it became very clear that I needed to collaborate with others who could bring those skills and sensitivities that I had not fully developed or mastered myself, and perhaps never will. But the collaboration then was to take my Western medical approach and to combine that with people with demonstrated skill, expertise, and wisdom in other traditions, and bring that together with the medical practice. So when we moved to Sacramento, I sought out a group of shamanic healers, and Jana was a member of that group, and I joined that group for the time I was in Sacramento, and Jana and I formed a healing collaborative from that.
That's beautiful. And how lucky are your patients? Because I don't know if there's a lot of doctors in the spiritual closet, or maybe they're just not open to it, but it's been really rare in my own personal experience, and just actually finding doctors like you to actually come onto a podcast like this. So I'd like to ask you that question. Have you found amongst your colleagues that this has been actually very accepted, but maybe they've had some reservations, or do you bump up against your colleagues in the medical community kind of looking at this as voodoo, woo-woo stuff?
Well, I think that there is a lot of that attitude from Western clinicians, and even my own two children, 33 and 30, who are both in medical careers, are not at a place in their lives where they can incorporate or recognize the sort of stuff that I'm doing. And I would have to say that even in my own 20s and 30s, and even into my mid-40s, I would not have had the same attitude or approach or acceptance of a shamanic approach. I had at that time a much greater, let's call a cerebral approach to the mysteries of creation, which came through my studies of cosmology and the Gurdjieff-Uspensky schools of fourth way teachings. And And yet, the central truth and element, the core of so many of these traditions, just as the core of all the great world religions, has to do with, if you want to think of it as God's love or the love of creation or the energy of creation that comes down through us. So I wouldn't have embraced it from that level in my 20s, 30s, or even the 40s. And it wasn't until my late 40s when I was studying energy medicine and began my shamanic studies in my very early 50s that I became aware of or developed an appreciation for the power, the value, etc., of this approach. And I think that even our discussing it as shamanism per se assumes that we all have the same understanding of what that terminology means. And I think that words can be misleading because we think we know, because we think we have a definition for the word, but until we experience something, experience the more mystical or ethereal aspects of what it means to be sick not just in body, but in spirit, soul, emotions, etc., until we really understand the depth in which illness permeates the human being, we can't really begin to understand the sort of approach that Jana or other shamanic healers would use, or traditional indigenous healers in Native American or Peruvian or Siberian cultures would use to effect healing. And the last thing I want to say about this for this point is that I've also come to a new appreciation in the last 15 or 20 years of the power of illness and disease to teach us lessons that we would not learn about life if they were not there. And that's a really important point that I think will rub a number of people the wrong way, because the idea of medicine is to restore and maintain health. But I would suggest that health has no intrinsic value in and of itself if it doesn't provide you an opportunity to follow the journey for which you were born into this lifetime.
Great point. Thank you for saying that. Now, I'm assuming too that your results with the patients that you're working with must speak for themselves. So like even if people are maybe a little skeptical about the work that you're doing, I am sure that there have been some stories, and maybe one or two that you'd like to share about the work that you've done, either with the critically ill, the children that you've worked with. Jana, would you like to share a story with us?
I think that probably the very first patient that David had me come assist with, a 9-month-old infant that was brain dead right before Christmas, and that was in 2013. And so I think that story is probably the most heartrending, but also the most hopeful. And so I'd like to share that one, actually. So these parents of this very young infant that became brain dead after a horrendous car accident. When David had me come in and we sat and talked for a few minutes, it was very apparent that the parents just wanted to have me do anything to save their child's life. And so when I went into the room with the dozen or so relatives packed around this very tiny infant, I fully expected to feel just the utter tragedy of the whole situation. But at that very moment, when I walked into the room, I had this enormous uplifting sensation that I was in the presence of an ascended master, that in this tiny infant, that his soul and his spirit was so beyond his little broken body. And it was such a profound feeling. It really swept over me in a way that I wasn't expecting, because obviously in that situation, it's so tragic. And yet I didn't feel that. Instead, I felt the immensity of this little infant's soul. And I remember just standing there and pausing and just recognizing how profound this little infant soul was in bringing this experience to the parents, the family members, the medical providers, everyone, all of us were being brought this opportunity. And so the next words that I heard internally were, this child is not long for this world. And so at that point, when I walked up to the baby's bedside, and I had my rattle with me, so I shook my rattle very gently. And then the other unexpected thing that I saw with my internal sight were these angel wings start to form underneath the baby's body. And so as a child psychology, child development, high school teacher for decades, I am a very grounded person, very logical, and yet with my shamanic training for these past 20 years, I've come to understand that the world of spirit and the world of the soul brings forth a whole different understanding of life and of death and the afterlife. And so when I saw that, I knew that what I had heard right before that this child was not long for this world, was the absolute truth, at least for what I was sensing. And so then David and I walked out of the room with the parents. And again, they were pleading with me, is there anything that you can do to save our baby's life? And I said, that's not for me to really promise or tell you, but I will come back again. So the next morning, I went back and I proposed to the parents, would they be willing to let me facilitate them to communicate with their infant on a heart-to-heart spiritual level? And the mother, being raised Catholic, the very first thing she said to me was, I don't know if I believe that that's possible because I'm a very skeptical person. The father, who was Mian, that Asian culture that has a lineage of shamans in their culture, immediately said yes, he was willing to try. And then the mother said to me, she said, we've asked the doctors to give us 3 more days because we'd heard that if the baby's brain were allowed some time, that the swelling would go down before they had to make the decision to remove life support. And then she said, well, I'm willing to try. And I told her, all you have to do is to bring an open mind and an open heart to this process. So we walked into the room, minus all the relatives, and the father was standing on one side of the bed. I was on the other. The mother was sitting at the foot of the bed, and David was sitting on a chair behind her. And again, I started using my rattle, and I became an intermediary on behalf of the baby's spirit and the parents. And so I just allowed myself to be that conduit of communication between them. And so the words that were said to the father were, through me, what do you need to know right now? And he said, we need to know if you can survive this, if you can live, past this accident, because we love you so much and we want to see you live your life out. And then the next words that were said through me were, you need to not feel guilty or have any doubts or second guesses about taking that drive that morning that resulted in the car accident. And then the next words that were said to him were, "I cannot leave in peace unless you release me in peace. Can you do that?" And he wasn't able to respond. So then I was directed to turn towards the mother. And the words that were said to her were, "You've been the most loving mother that any child could ever have asked for. You loved me more than life itself. You would have gladly given your life for mine, but I can't leave in peace unless you release me in peace. Can you do that?" And she was silent. And so then I knew that my role at that moment was finished. So David and I walked out of the room, and both parents just started hugging and kissing their baby. And then moments later, they walked out and they said to us, "We've made up our minds. We're ready to remove life support." And so then that led them to make the decision to donate their baby's organs. And so they asked me if I would be present for that, which I ended up doing that evening, late at night. I went and I drummed for them during that process as life support was removed. And it was just the most sacred, profound experience. My very first experience working with David on behalf of one of his patients and families.
Wow, that is quite a first experience for you. I mean, it wasn't like spirit didn't put you in there easily. It was like, ooh, wow, that is intense.
It was very intense, and I'd been doing shamanic healing work for 15 years prior to that, and worked with people with cancer. And so I think I was trained really well in that respect with all of those experiences. But this was intense in a way that I'd never experienced. Felt like a rite of passage, actually.
Yeah. And how did that experience prepare you for other patients that you've worked with David?
It really prepared me in a way to allow me to connect with the families, not having any preconceived idea of what to do or how to do it, but just to have the intention that I be of service on behalf of them and the patient, but not to have any expectations of how that was going to go, other than just to really facilitate a heart-to-heart and soul-to-soul, spirit-to-spirit connection.
Wow. Great. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm a little blown away. Now, David, I want to ask you a question, because you had mentioned something earlier about how illness can kind of be a teacher, right? And what's the point of being here or having, this health if there isn't a lesson? And I always wondered about children, right? About it feels like that they haven't really been here that long on Earth. So, why would they have to go through these illnesses? What is it that they have to learn? Or are they teachers for the parents? Is the illness in the child the lesson for the family? So I was always curious. I've asked kind of a couple of different healers about, that question where, sometimes I've heard people say, well, you could be working out your karma, or maybe it's the depression that has been, in your body, or your anger, and then this cancer manifests. But like sometimes the children don't even have that many years, like a 9-month-old, to even accumulate any stored emotions or experiences that, unless it is considered to be carried over from a past life. But I wanted to get your view on that, David, about children having these illnesses, and what has been your understanding on a spiritual level with their health?
Well, I fully recognize that the idea of the human spirit, soul, whatever, not having a single life is probably not correct, and that there are probably past lives and there will be future lives, but this life now is the one that we are given or have chosen to deal with and to experience, and that we would not experience things if our spirit wasn't incarnated in this physical form, in this family that we perhaps even chose to be born into, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of assumptions that go on here that would rub many rational Western people the wrong way. And I don't mean to justify any of that, but my impressions from my 35 plus year career in academic pediatric medicine lead me to believe that, especially for very young children, for newborns, perhaps even for unborn children, all the way up through school-age children, a lot of the meaning, I'm not going to say purpose, because I don't intend for it to sound as if there's purpose here, but a lot of the meaning to be derived from their life challenges, whether it's physical illness or whether it is mental illness or autism or birth trauma and cerebral palsy, these sorts of things. A lot of it in the early years is material for them to teach their parents with, and that it is in many ways far more about what they are teaching others, the doctors, the nurses, the parents, the extended family, the community that has to adapt ramps at school for them, and all these sorts of things. There are deep, deep lessons about compassion and those sorts of things that are being offered. And I feel that this begins to shift somewhere towards puberty and adolescence, and that then so much of the physical illness, disease that we see towards teenage, young adult, and adult years again becomes much more of the question, what do I, as the person who has this medical condition, learn as a result of having it? What are the lessons that I am being offered? So my overarching concept is that our lives are given to us to teach others lessons in our relationship with them, and for us to learn things in our relationship to those other people as well. And that from the hospice and end-of-life point of view, when one has learned as many lessons as one can in this lifetime and has taught as many lessons as one has to teach or can teach in this lifetime, then one has completed one's life work. And that can happen whether a child is 3 days old, 9 months old, like the infant that Jana worked with, or any age. So I think that addresses some of your question here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I guess my other question would be too, kind of thinking of Louise Hay. I'm sure you guys are familiar with her work and how she really was able to identify a lot of the physical ailments could be connected to an emotional probable cause. So I'm just curious to know, in the work that the two of you have done together, have you seen any patterns, anything patterns within certain illnesses attached to certain lessons that you think people are teaching? I know, David, you mentioned the word compassion here, but I'm just curious to know, since 2013, you guys have been working together for quite a while. I'm curious if there is a patterning that you're seeing.
I'm going to defer to Jana at this point, and then I'll speak more after that.
Yes, I definitely subscribe to that understanding, not only through medical intuitive studies that I have gone through, but also in all of the patients and clients that I've worked with. So, for example, let's take cancer, because there are so many different forms of cancer. When you think about it, what is eating away at the body? And so let's say it's pancreatic cancer. And because on some understanding of that being processing, the sweetness of life, and maybe there's a lack of sweetness of life in a person. And so perhaps cancer as an illness is bringing the opportunity for the person to stop whatever it is that they're doing in their life and really do an overhaul of their life. So their thoughts, their beliefs, their emotions, how they approach life, perhaps the work, the relationships, because there's nothing like a disease such as cancer to stop one in their tracks from continuing to do whatever it was that they were doing. And so for me, when I'm looking at the reasons why people are coming in to see me for healing sessions, or for example, when David has referred patients for me to work with, I certainly look for what is the emotion and the belief that has long been held. And I call that a core belief or a core healing issue that this person has held. Of course, if it's an infant, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What opportunities for lessons are the infants actually bringing the parents, the family members, and all the people working on their behalf medically? But if it's an adult, I really feel that illnesses definitely have a lot of metaphorical as well as symbolic meaning for the person to look at. And oftentimes people have blinders to their own meaning of illness that they're suffering or experiencing. And so that's when I think work like shamanic work is helpful in facilitating people to understand these connections.
Great. Thank you. David, would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, I think that, again, as we understand neural development and cognitive development in young children, what does a newborn or a 1 week old really cognitively understand or comprehend? And I believe that, again, so much of the early childhood experiences are meant to be more than anything else, or can serve. Let me take back the word meant, because that suggests some sort of intention, and I don't want to attribute that to it, but these early childhood experiences can serve as mirrors for the parents and other people involved in the child's life to actually look at their own core healing issues, as Jana has called them. And I think what we have seen in several cases, including the 9-month-old case that Jana referred to, and another child who was a 1.5 years old with a metabolic condition that we worked with, that there are core healing issues for the parents in terms of coming to peace with letting the child go when there was nothing more that could be done. And clearly, from a Western medical perspective, a brain dead 9-month-old is legally dead, and the approach is very clear from a medical perspective. And yet, what was the lesson being offered to the parents? It had to do with a shift in their own understanding of being able to let the child go with peace, in peace. And so underlying this is what we have seen in other cases, which is that parents come to realize that the bond and love with their child does not die when the body dies. And we have seen this in several of the cases we've worked on. where the parent comes to the realization that even though the child is gone and they grieve the loss of the child's life in their lives tremendously, they recognize that there remains a connection and a living experience with their child that they would not have anticipated before the death, that they had to learn as a part of the process of getting ready for the death and then losing the child. So I think these sorts of themes come up commonly in the work we do. There's one other theme that I would like to bring up if we have time to talk about that.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is a theme of safety. And when the human spirit or soul feels that life is not safe, then it finds a way to exit this life. It finds a way to create an incurable condition in the body, and in so doing, it is freed from this life that it's living and is able to go to wherever spirits go next. And I've seen this in several cases where I'm very clear on the fact that children have developed either decompensated heart failure or incurable brain cancers when they were in an emotionally or spiritually, energetically threatening living environment or family environment, and the only way the spirit could feel safe was to develop an exit strategy, which was death of the body and release of the spirit.
Wow, very interesting. That's pretty intense as well, and makes a lot of sense when you put the two together. Okay, so after talking to you guys, I want to embrace the sweetness of life and make sure my pancreas is okay and feel safe here. Feel safe here to to continue to live out and teach lessons, like you say, and learn lessons. So this topic is just so interesting, and would also like you guys to share a little bit about what you're going to be presenting at the 2021 Afterlife Conference that is virtual. You guys are on the Saturday, which is June 26th, and Terry is also, who is the coordinator and founder of the Afterlife Awareness Conference. Your presentation is also offering continuing education credits. So that's also a really wonderful thing with this Afterlife Awareness Conference that we have, is that you're actually able, if you attend and you're watching it live, that you can be a part of the continuing ed track, which is part of your presentation. So what are you guys going to be presenting this year?
Jana, what are we going to be talking about this year? You're the leader.
We'll be giving a little bit of a background, like we did during this interview, of what shamanic healing involves and why a Western physician and a shamanic healer collaborated. And after we cover just briefly what shamanism is, and because obviously everyone knows what Western medicine is, we will provide some experiential. So I'll be drumming so that people can experience that immediate sense of peace that we've been able to provide patients and family members. And then I'll be leading people through a guided journey, which is similar to guided imagery or guided meditation, in that I'll be narrating while drumming to stated intention. And that will allow people to experience what we've been providing for all these families and patients these past 8 years, because I was looking at the number of families that we've provided this for in the number of sessions, and it's over 100. So we want people to really experience firsthand, what does it mean to do this collaboration? And that's, I think that's in a nutshell what we'll be providing.
Great. Thank you so much. And I know that you guys do have, you record some of these guided shamanic journeys. Your website is healingjourneys.life. And also congratulations to you both, because I know that you guys were featured in a nationally broadcast television show called Healing Quest. And the segment was titled Shamans in the ICU. So if our listeners want to check that out, that's wonderful. So healingjourneys.life, what can people find there?
Well, they can find the 4 guided journeys, and they can also see upcoming presentations and workshops that we're giving, as well as patient stories, cases, including pictures and parent testimonials to how the work has helped them. And so we really intend for this website to be a resource, not only for medical providers, but for laypersons, so that it's not just for information, but as you know, with this pandemic, almost in a year anniversary coming up, these guided journeys are intended to help people to alleviate the isolation, the grief, loss, worry, anxiety, stress, tension that we've all been experiencing.
Wonderful. And I'm sure many people have asked you guys this. When are you going to write your book? You got a book coming out or what?
Well,
yeah.
The book is it's in my head. It's in the works. The form that it needs to take. And, there are going to be a number of revelations here related to patients we've cared for that may be very difficult for some people to read and hear, but I think that it's important things to bring out. And once again, all of this work is hand in hand with one's own healing work. I think that's an important part of the message we want to bring forward, especially for Western clinicians. Most of them have their tradition of the wounded healer coming from ancient Greece. And I think that that's part of what we need to bring forward in the message, as well as what true integrative medicine is. It's not one person being able to be everything for all people in all situations, but rather bringing together multiple pieces that create a product that's more than the sum of the individual parts. So that's what I hope that we'll bring forward in this session as well in June.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for coming on to the Path 11 podcast. And again, if anyone listening is interested in attending the virtual Afterlife Awareness Conference, you can go to afterlifeconference.com. You can purchase your tickets there. And if you're watching theirs, you'll also get some CEU credits if you need that. So again, wonderful to see you guys again, to speak with you again. We look forward to sitting in on your presentation, which is cool. I get to watch all of them because we happen to be the ones, creating this. So I get educated all weekend long, and I absolutely love it. So thank you guys so much for being on the Path 11 podcast, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share our work. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Take care.